It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 110, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. Jean-Paul Courtens is most famous for being the founder and owner of Roxbury Farm in New York's Hudson Valley. He operated Roxbury Farm with his wife, Jody Bolluyt, from 1990 through about 2015, when he started work with the Hudson Valley Farm Hub to create and then to run a professional farmer training program where he is now the Associate Director for Farm Training. Roxbury Farm is a 245-acre integrated farming operation with 100 acres dedicated to vegetable production for a 1,000-member CSA. Jean-Paul shares the details of Roxbury's green manure rotation, the details of how they use unique crops, careful scheduling, and a summer-fallow period to clean the fields of weeds and pathogens, allowing for more efficient field operations. We also discuss the details of the semi-permanent bed system that complements the soil building cover cropping program. Jean-Paul's success as a farmer and his distinctive leadership builds upon the recognition of his skills as a teacher and mentor on organic practices, land stewardship, whole farm planning, and farm business development. And we discuss how he brings this all to bear in the Pro Farmer Training Program at the Hudson Valley Farm Hub. Jean-Paul also shares some of the techniques that he used at Roxbury Farm to train employees and establish expectations, as well as to help people avoid mistakes and misunderstandings. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is generously supported by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are versatile, maneuverable in tight spaces, lightweight for less compaction, and easy to maintain and repair on the farm. Gear-driven and built to last for decades of dependable service. BCSAmerica.com. And by Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop-growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high-quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. And by Small Farm Central, providers of Member Assembler CSA management software. Member Assembler has the flexibility to serve the needs of the myriad of farmers' business models, as well as serving non-traditional local food subscriptions like meat, fish, dairy, and fruit CSAs and CSFs. SmallFarmCentral.com. Jean-Paul Courtens, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
I don't know if you know this, but for the 100th episode, I had a friend interview me for the show, and she asked me who were people on my bucket list to get on this show, and you were one of them. So I'm really pleased that you're here today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I feel quite honored that you mentioned my name.
All right, so I'd like to start off by just having you kind of give us a lay of the land in your life. I know you've got a couple of projects going on and the new work that you're doing with the Hudson Valley Farm Hub, even though I think you're more known for the Roxbury Farm work that you've done. But if you kind of just tell us about where you are and what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. So in 1990, I founded Roxbury Farm. And, that has gone through, from basically 5 acres of vegetables to now it's becoming a 425 acre integrated farming operation, whereby it's pretty solid. And one of the things that I've always done at Roxbury Farm is I work with apprentices. And very early on in my career, I realized that the word apprentice, in here often is not really the way that we use the word apprentice in Europe, where it means that you're doing a formal apprenticeship as part of your agricultural education. And so in the early 90s, already a group of farmers and I came together and we formed the CRAFT program, the Collaborative Regional Alliance for Farmer Training. It was a collaboration between the very few organic biodynamic farmers that were in the area in the Hudson Valley and in the Pioneer Valley of Massachusetts. So we really had to scrape together the 12 farmers that were actually working at that time in a pretty large area. And we all felt the same way. We wanted to do more training. So training has been dear to my heart. And about 3 years ago, I was invited by the director of the Local Economies Project to become involved here with the possible purchase of a large tract of land, and they wanted to incorporate some farmer training. So he got my ear and said, that's very interesting. But initially, I was hired as a consultant to help them in a transition to organic agriculture. This is a 1,200-acre property. Actually, it's 1,600 acres with 1,200 acres of tillable land. And that was farmed predominantly in sweet corn. It was a sweet corn operation. You have a big hydro cooler that used to be here and a big packing line and large harvesters. And so they wanted to transition this farming operation to organic methods. So I worked very closely with the farm manager to put some rotations in place to prepare for this organic transition. And then the second conversation started that they say, like, we want this really to be a research and education center. It's going to be a nonprofit. It is a nonprofit. And would you like to be more involved with creating curriculum for a farmer training program? And that's really where I got more deeper involved, and that led to me becoming full-time employed here as the Associate Director for Farmer Training at the Farm Hub. And we're going now in our second year with our Pro Farmer program. We had 3 pro farmers in the first year who are going into the second year. And then now we're starting with the second cohort of 5 pro farmers. So we'll have 8 pro farmers here working with us at the Hudson Valley Farm Hub. And the idea and what really got me excited about this working with them is really the vision that the director from LEP brought to the Hudson Valley Farm Hub, which is guided by a triple bottom line, is that it's not good enough to just create successful farmers and to have people economically viable. We also have to think about the social relationship. We're thinking about equity in general that is often absent in the farming community, not only for farmers in, for example, having access to land, but also with farm workers. And then, of course, the ecological component is very deeply part of our mission here. So it has been a really wonderful and exciting opportunity for me to be a pioneer again, which I was when I founded Roxbury Farm. And so for me, pioneering is definitely in my blood. So it's something that I couldn't really pass on. And here I am.
I've done a lot of reading about conventional business and conventional entrepreneurship. And it's something they talk about a lot, is how much different it is to start a business or to begin an enterprise than it is to maintain something, and how oftentimes the people that are the best at starting and growing something aren't necessarily the people that are best at keeping it running in the long term, because it's 2 entirely different skill sets. It's I love that you've done this creation and now you've kind of stepped on to this next thing. And I'm really interested in the Farm Hub because there's like you said, there's a lot of apprentice programs, internship programs out there that I feel like oftentimes, and I know we use them this way on our farm, the various vocabulary that we used, it was a source of cheap labor. And rather than being a source of real in-depth, structured farm training. And then I've also seen there's a lot of incubator programs out there now where people are given a half acre or 3/4 of an acre and some access to farm machinery. But it seems like you've got something that's a little bit more integrated and wholly thought out. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're actually doing the training there at the Farm Hub?
Yeah. So the pro farmers, they're actually full-time employees. So they get a salary, they get benefits. That even includes a wellness fund. So that's one thing that's different. They're employees at the farm, even though significant amount of time, about 20 hours a week or so, is spent on training. But we do regard them, and I think we really felt it was important that we give them an economic foundation to work from, especially if we want to reach out to people who otherwise do not have access to farmer training. I have to admit that many of the apprentices that have come to Roxbury Farm, they were in a position whereby they could afford to work for $1,400 a month plus housing or something. Because even though they had 4 years of college degree behind them, if they ever decided to do something differently, they had usually a career to fall back on that would pay them a decent amount of income. We also would like to include people who really would not have that opportunity. So for us, paying them has been an important principle. The other one is that, yes, you're right, there's a lot of training opportunities. There is actually a multitude of choices for people who want to get into agriculture. What we also found is that they're often relatively small scale. We said, like, well, what we don't want to do is train new farmers who are then going to start another CSA or produce for farmers market. Can we train farmers who are willing to scale up? So we're really selecting also farmers who are willing to work at a larger scale. So in our curriculum, we include really a lot of mechanization, a lot of emphasis on mechanization. They, in the first year, they become certified pesticide applicators, and you may ask yourself why, we were only using unrealistic materials. Well, there's a lot to learn from studying the core manual and being able to really know what it means to apply worker safety standards. So that's an important principle. The same thing is they got a GAP training, good agricultural practices training last year. They will go through the FISMA training this coming year. So we really want to prepare them on a little bit different level here. So we're also working very closely with cooperative extension in order to give them the tools in horticulture, in plant pathology and entomology, give them the tools under their belt. So when they're out in the field, they can identify insects, they can identify diseases, they know what materials to use. So they are able to work on a very efficient and effective scale.
So when somebody comes into the program, how many years does the training program go for a given individual?
Well, it really depends on the individual. We had the very first cohort, we had some people with already extensive experience coming in. One of the trainees actually was a vegetable manager before she came here. So for her, the training might be not as long as for some other, but we envision this program to be a 3 to 5 year program, whereby we are in the very first year, we're taking them really, and we bring them on board of what the standards are here, what the procedures are on this farm, and bring everybody to the same place. And then slowly, we want to give them more independence, whereby they are able to really try out what it means to run your own enterprise. And they can do that by taking the third year, they can do that by taking on their own crop or few crops and operate it independently, track their input cost, and we will assess, how successful they are, not just how economically viable these operations are, but also to see if they actually meet a triple bottom line. To what extent, how did they manage the people they work with? How did they take care of the land, and how do we monitor that? So for us to be successful is to really meet that triple bottom line at the end. And to me, I really look at farmer training not that different from becoming a medical doctor. I think we really have been underestimating the skill level it takes to be successful as a farmer. And so the approach that we have taken with the curriculum is that the amount of information and the amount of knowledge and skill that our farmers would need to have when they complete this program is not that different from the amount of knowledge and skill level that a medical doctor has. And I think that's what it takes to be working on a mid-scale level.
Something I think is interesting about the Hudson Valley Farm Hub is that you are promoting, well, you call it a mid-scale level. I mean, when you talk about 100 acres of vegetables, for a lot of people, that we think of that as being a very large scale farm. Of course, in a California or Arizona sense, it's pretty tiny. But you're not talking about 5 and 10 and 20 acres of produce. How did you end up working on that kind of a scale? Because I know that's one of the hallmarks of Roxbury Farm is that it's not a small farm.
No, I mean, but still, if you look at it from enterprise to enterprise in the sense of like crop enterprises, we are a tiny farm. It's just that we are putting all these small crops enterprises together that form together a pretty large farm. Because with our CSA at Roxbury, we're producing 40 to 50 different vegetables, pork, beef, and lamb. And so between all these enterprises, we are, as far as revenue is concerned, we're considered a large farm. But when you actually look at how we are growing these crops, I would not consider ourselves to be operating at the mid scale. We are somewhat mechanized, but again, and we're probably have more we could probably handle for each crop more acreage with the mechanization that we have, but still, it is not near to where we would be able to compete on a wholesale level.
And maybe we should back up a bit, because I feel like I know Roxbury Farm pretty well, even though you and I've never met and I've never been to the farm. I've been following what you guys are doing for 20 years out there. But can you tell us, for our listeners, give us the lay of the land at Roxbury Farm?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think we're in philosophy we're not going to be changing that much different. So I can really speak for both the Farm Hub and Roxbury Farm as far as what our principles and philosophies is there, which is really based on reduced inputs. And so Roxbury Farm is right now about 425 acres, although there's only 250 acres really of workable land. The rest is really in woodlands or waterways or any other areas that are really what we consider to be biodiversity areas. We really give that back to the wildlife. And of the 250 acres, about 100 is dedicated to vegetable crop production, although at any given time, and this is really important to understand, in vegetables, it may be 33. So we are losing. I don't like the word losing, but we are giving up of about 45 acres of land. We're giving up about 12 or 13 acres in headland and harvest lanes. And we have done that because we really want to have easy access to our produce. We don't want someone to schlep a crate of broccoli for 200 feet. Nobody ever walks more than 24 feet with any given bucket or crate to what we call the harvest lane, and then the truck picks that up. So it takes up a certain amount of land. Then the other half of that vegetable acreage is dedicated to growing green manures. When we found this farm, the levels of phosphorus, potassium in certain areas of the farm were very elevated. It was a potato farm using organic fertilizer, which means we would continue to elevate these phosphorus levels because, inorganic and manure-based fertilizers, you will find, of course, phosphorus and potassium in certain amounts. If your application is based on how much nitrogen you want to, give to your vegetable crop. So we decided very early on that in order to both bring the organic matter levels up of our soil and at least not to deplete them, and to bring up the nitrogen levels of soil, we would be greatly dependent on green manures. And the other reason for doing that particular rotation, whereby we alternate vegetables with green manures in one given year, is for weed control. And so when I talk about this reduced input model, I'm looking at we're not trying to maximize the revenue on our farm because we have 250 acres of open land, 100 acres of it is very suitable for vegetable crop production. And as you hear, only 33 is actually put into actual production any given year. So some of that land, at least 25 or 30, is in permanent harvest lanes and headland, but then the other land is then in green manure crops. And what we're finding over time, and I don't have any way how that is documented. I'm not a researcher, but we do know that our cost of producing, say, an acre of potatoes has gone down. Our yield has gone up. And what we're finding here is that for me, if I have a harvester who is trying to find, say, a lettuce mix in the weeds and harvesting and basically weeding at the same time, that's costing me a great deal of income and increases my cost. So our philosophy has always been if I have clean ground, I have fertile ground. And when I say clean, it's not just clean from weed seeds, it's also from pathogens. So if there is a some kind of a pathogen on my lettuce, then also, or yellow leaves or anything like that. Again, it takes time for that harvester to then be sorting out these leaves while they're harvesting. So when you develop a rotation whereby you have healthy crops and whereby you have clean land, then we're actually looking at like, yes, we could have maximized our revenue by growing 100 acres of vegetables, but we actually are doing better on those 33 because we have really reduced our input cost. We're not really bringing in organic fertilizers because we're growing our own fertilizer in the form of green manures. So about 50% of all our nitrogen needs in the vegetables actually comes from green manures. And the other half, we still are dependent on some manures that we are bringing into our vegetable fields, which is, by the way, necessary because we're exporting quite a bit of potassium, of course, when you are harvesting these vegetables. So it's not that we're completely trying to stay away from manure altogether or, composted manure, but, we're trying to do some nutrient budgeting there whereby we're not elevating the levels in our vegetable soils. As when you have a continuous vegetable crop production, that is a real danger.
So tell me a little bit more about the practical details of the rotation that you're using. With half of your land in cover crops, half in vegetables. Mm-hmm. How are you moving between crops from year to year to year?
Yeah. So it is important that you start. So when I develop a rotation, I usually think 3 years ahead. I'm standing in front of a piece of land and I say like, what does it want to become in 3 years? And so usually it's already in vegetables at that given time. So you have a way to think it through what next year's cover crop should be. And then really it's a matter of like thinking it through, like how I'm going to treat the land this year to be ready. So if it is now 2017, in 2019. And I'm really looking at like what is, for example, the particular weed pressure that I'm finding in this land, and also what is the crop that I imagine would really follow nicely in this particular, based on the history of what has been grown there. So, for example, if that field, if I imagine that field will be in potatoes in 2019, I'm starting to think about like how I'm going to start limiting the weed pressure of my summer weeds. So I will definitely start working with a summer bare fallow then in that particular piece of land in 2018. So I will not grow a cover crop whereby I will not have the ability to do some real good weed control in the months when it is going to be a problem in my potatoes. So looking ahead, as far as thinking, making sure I will have the fertility, I will have the the land clean at the right time of the year. Those are kind of things whereby you start thinking a little bit more about your rotation. And it's really that simple. If you growing a spring crop, you wouldn't want to follow with a spring bare fallow. There are very different weeds at different times in the year, as you of course know, and it's a matter of cleaning up the land beforehand.
And so when you're using that summer bare fallow, that of course is coming between cover crops, right? It's not like you're just leaving the land bare all year. You're leaving it bare for a specific period of time.
When you talk about a summer bare fallow, that land will be open for a certain number of weeks. And then if you have a very dry summer, you might, it might be very worthwhile to irrigate that land in order to let the weeds sprout up.
And then what are you doing to maintain that bare fallow without excessively tilling the soil? Because that's something I know when I experiment with bare fallows, sometimes it felt like, God, we were just out there all the time working the soil. And I know that's not something you really want to be doing.
No, I agree with you completely. It's an interesting dilemma that you're faced with, especially in the transition stages, where we inherited at Roxbury Farm a very a seed bank that was tremendous, and so we had to overcome that. And And the only way to really deal with that in some areas was to put it back in hay, whereby we allowed some of these seeds to lose their viability over time. In other areas, we just had to cultivate them out. But I will tell you, if you are growing some very vigorous green manure crops, what the Nordels, and by the way, the Nordels have always been the role model. We always talk about in the mid 90s when we adopted this particular rotation, we said like we're Nordelling our farm, and I last time I checked it actually in the dictionary right now, Nordelling. So this is something that anyone can do. That means that you rotate basically your green manures out of into vegetables alternate years. And what we have found by doing soil testing is that we actually have been increasing our organic matter levels, despite the fact that we are doing this incredible intensive tillage. So we haven't quite figured it out yet, because this is something, of course, that you talk to the soil scientists, they will say like tillage is an addiction, you shouldn't be doing it, and there's no way you're going to maintain your organic matter levels, and you're not going to have aggregate stability. And what we're finding actually with this rotation is that we moved Roxbury Farm in 2000 to another piece of land, and between 2000 and 2013, 2014, we basically doubled the organic matter levels.
Wow!
Without the import of a lot of compost. So we can do this. So I hear what you're saying. I am not advocating extensive tillage by any means. But what we have found is that you can really increase aggregate stability. You can definitely increase active carbon and increase the organic matter levels over time. But you're going to have to really select your green manures very carefully. And one thing that we have found, which is really important, is not about how much organic matter you plow under. It's what kind of organic matter you plow under. Make sure there is a legume mixed in with your green manures. And that has been really important. So having legumes in your mix and having a diversity of cover crop mixes has been key in increasing the organic matter.
When you say a diversity of cover crop mixes, are you doing these, I'm trying to think of the right word now that I've heard of, but these very diverse cover crops where you might have 5, 6, or 7 different species growing at a time?
Yeah, I don't go that extreme, but definitely 3 or 4. Yeah. For example, one of my favorite mixes for the summer, for a summer mix, is Crotalaria with Japanese millet, sunflower, and either regular 40-10 field peas or that would reseed themselves in the fall, or go for a cowpea. So there would be 4 in that mix. And I would seed, about 10 pounds of Japanese millet, about 50 pounds of Crotalaria or sun hemp, about 5 pounds of sunflower, and then 50 pounds of cowpeas, or 50 pounds of regular peas.
That's really interesting. That's not, I mean, when I think cover crops, I always think, oats and peas or rye and hairy vetch, but you're using some really interesting species.
Yeah. And they get very tall. Mm-hmm.
And how did you get to those? I mean, I just had to Google Crotalaria because I've never actually heard of Crotalaria before, which either means I'm way out of touch or that you're doing some really weird things, one of the two.
Well, it's again like what some of us like to do. We go back to these old textbooks. I mean, see, all this stuff was figured out before 1930, and a lot of research has been done on this. So all you have to go back to these old textbooks, and you'll find them all. I mean, Adrian Peterson wrote a wonderful book called Green Manuring in the 1930s. And he listed every single one of them and with all their benefits. So, and I got really intrigued by Crotalaria, and people told me you can't use that because it's a tropical legume. Well, this is one of those things, side effects of global warming. Apparently, we can use Crotalaria. We're able to do it. So,
I mean, just because we're talking about Crotalaria, tell us a little bit more about that as a crop and what it does for you and why you chose that. I mean, just to get down in the, I was going to say get down in the weeds, but just to get down in the cover crop a little bit here.
Yeah. So we've been growing sorghum Sudan for many years, and I was trying to find a legume that could actually compete with sorghum Sudan. And I tried forage soybean that was really expensive, and any other legume was just being shaded out by the sorghum. And we really like sorghum because, a tremendous amount of biomass that you can work under at the end of the season. And so until I basically started reading Peterson and say, like, let's see if we come up with a tall legume here. And crotalaria is one of the legumes that gets about 6 feet tall. It's a cowpea, and it effectively competes as long as you don't up your rates too much of the sorghum or the Japanese millet. It works quite well. So, and that's really, it was just one of these things that I said, like, well, let's try it out. And initially I had a hard time convincing my seed supplier to ship it to New York. They didn't think it would work. We had similar problems with that with bell beans. Nobody on the East Coast grows bell beans. That's the West Coast crop. And bell beans is also one of my favorite green manure crops for the spring that we utilize. But anyway, so I've been, I do things, I think it through. And, this is what you do. You try things out, and you fail and you succeed sometimes. So for every successful cover crop that I've grown, there's probably a few other ones that didn't work out as well.
I want to go back to the bare fallow, and I'm interested in how you actually carry that out at a functional level. Like, what tools are you using? How often are you using them? How do you have them set up?
Sure. It all depends on, to what extent I have to make a seed bed, what I'm working with to begin with. If the bare fallow follows, say, like a spring lettuce, there's not a lot of tillage that needs to happen in order to create what we call a bare fallow. But maybe in some other cases, when I'm working under a green manure crop, a spring green manure crop, then I will have to use some more deep tillage. And we don't use a moldboard plow. I haven't used a moldboard plow for over 20 years. We only use a coulter chisel plow if we do that. We make sure we chop the green manure up as finely as possible, and then we coulter chisel plow. And then after that, we really follow with what we call a Perfecta 2 harrow. It's a combination seed bed maker, and you can set that at any depth you want, anywhere between 2 to 6 inches, although I really rarely go 6 inches deep with that tool. It really would pull awfully deep, but usually it's 2 to 4 inches. And then it's a very effective tool, especially if you have perennial weeds, bindweed or quackgrass. It will bring it to the surface and let it dry out. And it really depends on how much rainfall you have during your summer bare fallow, to what extent you're going to be effective. One of the things is that I am very careful about when it comes to aggregate stability is to be concerned that you don't work the soil too wet, but you also don't work it too dry. When you work it too dry, you have that same problem. The water really functions as some sort of glue between these aggregates, and you create dust. And when you're working it too wet, you smear the soil. So finding that perfect moisture when you do your bare fallow is really important. So if you have to irrigate these plots, that would be ideal. If you don't have the ability to do that, then the summer bare fallow is not as successful, except, of course, for your perennial weeds. But then you sometimes wait until you have some moisture in the soil in order to put your equipment on the field. But I would really warn farmers for not working their soil when it is too dry in that summer bare fallow.
How dry is too dry when you're working the soil?
Oh, you'll see when you create dust. I think always look back. I mean, when you see that your soil is being pulverized, and that's why I don't like rotavators or anything like that. I like any tool that finds the natural breaking points of your soil structure. So, I mean, when I went to ag school, and my soil science teacher, he basically took a lump of soil and dropped it from 3 feet down. He said, like, look, those are your natural breaking points. And he said, like, do not have a tool that does more than this. And I have used that as a guidance. It's like, so am I going to do something that is going to do more violence than dropping it from a 3 feet height? I'm probably doing some violence to the soil. So that will be one way of a litmus test, but you really are able to see when you are pulverizing the soil. One way is to also see it is when you see a discoloration. When you see a discoloration, you know that your aggregates, your sand, silt, clay, and organic matter are being separated. Easy to see when you take some soil, you rub it between your fingers, and you see that now suddenly the soil has a different color. And that's a good way of telling, like, oh, look, I just really rubbed all the aggregates apart. And that is what you're looking for, is for stable aggregates, stable aggregation of your soil.
I like that. That's a nice practical tip. I had never heard that before. Are you following that perfecta then with a cultipacker or anything to kind of to create some good seed to soil contact between the weed seeds and the soil?
Yeah, you would think that, right? I am not a fan of a cultipacker. A cultipacker is definitely one of those tools. We are using it when we're reseeding our hay fields, but I don't like it at all. It really does a lot of damage to those aggregates. So a rotavator and a cultipacker are two tools that I like to stay away from.
Okay, so you're not doing anything to firm that seed bed back up after you've gone through with that bare fallow with the perfecta?
No, precipitation will do that. That's really what, precipitation is a great way of creating good seed to soil contact.
And then how long would you do a bare fallow for? Like, is that something that you're going to do for 3 weeks or 6 or 10?
Yeah, I would say for about 3 to 4 weeks, and that's all you're going to need.
And then really, like you said, a matter of timing that for the crop that you're investing in for the future.
Correct. Yes, correct. So it's really thinking about, like, this field is going to be in potatoes the following year, so I'm going to flush out these weeds in the previous season. And then that field then is preceded by a spring cover crop and then a fall cover crop. Now, I will say, though, that once you have your weeds somewhat under control, you can move away from your summer bare fallow, and that's where we are at the place right now at Roxbury, where we have our weeds under control, and you can start moving into some very aggressive summer green manures. And here we're using shade as a form of weed control. So what we're finding with our sorghums and with our Japanese millet and crotalaria is that there will be a bit of an understory of weeds there, but because there's so much shade there, that these weeds that have germinated in the shade of those large, tall cover crops, they never form any seed heads. So here is a way whereby we are allowing for some germination to take place in the year before a vegetable crop, but we're not using a summer bare fallow to eliminate these weeds. We're actually using shade to make sure that these weeds do not reproduce.
Now, when you talked about clean fields and the importance of having, for example, a salad mix or a lettuce crop that's really clean from weeds, you also mentioned having them clean from pathogens. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, I think when you look at a vegetable rotation, I have some resources actually on the Roxbury Farm website, you will see that certain pathogens are not restricted to be hosted by just one particular plant family. So what you will see often is that if you want to break that cycle of not giving a host to that particular pathogen, is that growing a cereal is often the best way to break that. And this is really where you are looking at, by growing a completely different crop that is otherwise not really within your rotation, you are, in a way, depriving that pathogen of a host. And that really allows you then to clean up your land, so to speak. And I've always looked at vegetables as being this not so great as a rotation within themselves within plant families. They are as far as what they do to the soil, I don't consider them to be soil builders. They don't create a lot of shades, and they often, you have somewhat compacted situations of your soil. When you're growing these green manures, you're creating this environment in general that is much more conducive to beneficial organisms. One way that early on in the soil health test, one of the parameters that Harold van Es found was the absence or the presence of beneficial nematodes to be a real indicator of a healthy soil. So what do you need to do to increase the presence of beneficial organisms is to really create a healthy soil by creating great pore space and to really allow for that. And again, so if you have these off seasons whereby you can really build your soil and you're growing a very aggressively rooting crop, then you are able to also increase your beneficial organism and decrease your pathogens.
That's interesting that you just focused on the aggressively rooting part of the cover crop. Mm-hmm. So, because I mean,
Absolutely.
obviously when you drive by, you're looking at the tops, but you're really interested in what it's doing down below the soil.
Absolutely. Both from a rooting perspective, but also, if you are digging up your legumes, you want to see those nodules, you want to see them nice and pink. They're pumping nitrogen into your soil. But for example, a wonderful crop that we're using right now at the Farm Hub in the transition period is yellow blossom sweet clover. Yellow blossom sweet clover is one of those fantastic, very large legumes that form a tremendous amount of biomass. But most importantly, they are really, really good at breaking up any possible fracture pan down below. So those roots will go down. And not only will they break up any kind of, hard pan or plow pan, especially following a subsoiler, they will really follow that subsoiler down further down into the soil. They will also, with their root system, go down 7-9 feet and bring up nutrients that were otherwise lost and bring them up back to the surface. So it's another way, to reduce your inputs.
So now you said that when you guys moved your farm to the new land in 2001, you started Hudson Valley Farm in 1990, but then you moved 10 years later. When you made that move, did you guys immediately dive into this Nordell rotation, or was that something you had been doing before?
No, and it was a nice slip there. I did not start Hudson Valley Farm. I did work there, but
oh, whoops! You're right. Okay. Sorry, I'm giving you some credit
I'll
here.
I'll take the credit for that. Yeah, I did work for 3 years at Hudson Valley. But so when we started Roxbury Farm in 1990, I met the Nordells in the early 90s. And, the other person I met in the early 90s, there's a couple of changes that I made. And there were really basically the Nordells and then the Dennisons. I met the Dennisons up in Maine. And I was introduced then to the permanent bed system that he had done on 150 acres of vegetables there, Brian and Justine Dennison. And then the other thing, almost kind of the same time, I met the Nordells and then I met their rotation. And so I really created a combination of the semi-permanent bed system that I learned from Brian as I learned that rotation then from the Nordells. So those were really two very important places where I adjusted from a European approach of flat fields and whereby in Holland we use every square inch of land, and it's unthinkable to take a piece of land out of production because land costs about €100,000 a hectare, to this more less intensive approach whereby we have plenty land, but we really don't have the labor and we don't have the energy, we don't have the equipment to really work it so intensely as the Dutch do. So there's really was for me like being in the U.S. really adapting to what this was what was demanded of me, and so it was in the early 90s that we started very aggressively growing these green manure crops. and broadening our rotation.
And how did you go about making that transition? Because I know on my farm, when we started adopting the Nordell rotation, it was difficult. And in fact, for a large portion of our land, for our best land, where we probably would have benefited the most from doing it, I didn't feel like I could, because I didn't feel like I could take that land out of production and make the investment with it, because I needed to keep producing rather than building productive capacity.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way of putting it. It's an investment. And I think this is a dilemma, and this is a choice. So I don't have any judgment about it when people are not able to do it at any given time, because everybody knows what revenue they have to create or you produce that given year. So, and then if you do have to meet a particular production goal, you can do that. And can you afford to make that investment, really? And that's kind of like, and usually when we make an investment, we don't pay for it in any given year. We usually pay it off over time. This is very hard to imagine, taking out, say, an operating loan to take your land out of production, because it's going to pay off over time. And it is daring, and you're working with nature. It's not as easy as doing a cost analysis for this as saying, like, well, if I buy this tractor, it's an investment, and it's going to pay itself back over a certain number of years. But it is very similar. You have to look at it like that this is long-term. This is not like, oh, well, if I do this, there's an immediate payback. This takes time.
Now, you mentioned the Dennisons who were farming up in Maine and their permanent bed system. And I see from the pictures on the Roxbury Farm website that you guys are using a raised bed production system. But can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by a permanent bed system?
It is a semi-permanent bed system in the sense that we are taking our beds out at the end of the season and we plant our cover crop again on flat land. But what it is that it is, to a certain extent, it's a controlled field traffic. So because we have these permanent harvest lanes, we know where our sections are, and every section will have 8 raised beds. And in the case of Roxbury Farm, these raised beds are 6 feet from center to center. At the Farm Hub, we have 10 raised beds that are 5 feet or 60 inches from center to center. So it's still about 50 or 51 feet that is open ground in between each harvest lane. So we are able to find these beds back every year, and what we are breaking up these where the field traffic does go. But it is really important in that we, after primary tillage, we never put a tractor wheel on the area where we're growing the crops. So after the coulter chisel plow goes through this section where we do our, and in the earlier years, we had to first go through with a subsoiler, which is no longer necessary. This takes a number of years that you are eliminating your plow pan after years of moldboard plowing. And so, and then the only primary tillage we do is a coulter chisel plow that has actually an attachment in the back that's built by Unverfurt, which is an S-tine and a leveling bar. So it is really primary and secondary tillage in one pass. And then after that, we lay out what we call our rough beds. And Brian had built a rough bedder out of a disc and with some shields on the side. And that was his rough bedder. It was basically an offset disc with some shields that was, he built it in his own shop. We ended up settling about 6 years ago, maybe, for trying to lay these beds out 3 at a time by purchasing a double disc. So imagine that this is an equipment that lays out 3 beds at any given time with a row marker, whereby we are creating a hill whereby the center to center again is 72 inches. And so at the farm up again being 60 inches for center to center. So these are 2 discs, one large disc and one smaller disc, and then opposite of each other, creating basically a hill. It's a tool that is mostly used, say in North Carolina, for creating hills for sweet potatoes. and they're either 36 or 40 inches apart. We basically space them out a little further with the same effect. And that really then forms our wheel tracks. The nice thing about having a disc bedder that forms these beds 3 at a time is that we were more accurate about the spacing. It was, if you lay one bed out at a time and you repeat that 10 times in a section, you're going to be a couple of inches off by the end of that, when you make your final pass. So laying out a number of beds in one pass allows us to have more accuracy to find our beds back again where they were 2 years before. And because it is every other year, ideally. And so this is, that then is followed by an additional pass of a small perfecta bedder that then levels that out. And then we make our final pass if needed, because for many crops, this is a sufficient planting bed for, say, corn or anything like that, or cabbage. If we want a nice seed bed, we're actually following that with another combination seed bed maker that's mounted in the front and a buckeye bedder in the back to make a really nice flat surface. So that will take a number of passes, but you can hear that we are driving on that field each time to get a smoother and smoother seed bed. And for us, it's really important that at least that tractor tire is always in the same traffic. So it always follows the same place. And there's never any compaction where we end up then placing our seed or placing our plants.
Jean-Paul, with that, we're going to stop here, take a break, get a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with Jean-Paul Courtens from Roxbury Farm and the Hudson Valley Farm Hub in upstate New York. I didn't say Hawthorne Valley Farm that time. Perennial support for the Farmer to Farmer podcast is provided by Vermont Compost Company. Vermont Compost potting soils are a really special product. I used Vermont Compost Fort B as a blocking mix and a potting soil for over 12 years on my farm, and we grew great transplants with it. I mean, really great transplants year after year after year, and we save time, money, and management hassles compared to mixing our own. At a time in the organic movement, when we're seeing more and more companies jumping on the organic bandwagon, Vermont Compost is a reminder of the art and the craft of making a great potting soil. Not a good potting soil, a great potting soil. And one thing I've always appreciated about Vermont Compost is their ability to put out a consistent product year after year. And in something that's subject to as many variables as market farming, it's nice to have something you can count on. By the way, Jean-Paul counts on them too, at both Roxbury Farm and at the Hudson Valley Farm Hub. VermontCompost.com. Perennial support is also provided by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are often mistaken for just a rototiller, but it is truly a superior piece of farming equipment. Engineered and built in Italy, where small farms are a way of life, BCS tractors are built to standards of quality and durability that people expect of real agricultural equipment, the kind of dependability every farm needs. I've worked with BCS tractors for over 24 years, and I wouldn't consider anything else for my small tractor needs. And I'm not the only fan. More than 1.5 million people in 50 countries have discovered the advantages of owning Europe's most popular two-wheel tractor. And these really are small tractors with the kind of features found on their four-wheel cousins and a wide array of equipment. Power harrows, rotary plows, flail mowers, snow throwers, sickle bar mowers, chippers, log splitters, and more. Check out bcsamerica.com to see photos and videos of BCS in action. bcsamerica.com. And all right, we're back with Jean-Paul Courtens of Roxbury Farm and the Hudson Valley Farm Hub. I'm assuming that what we're talking about at Roxbury Farm, a lot of those production techniques also apply with what you're doing at Hudson Valley Farm Hub, right?
Yeah, and I think what is really exciting here is that, and I already mentioned that to you before, is that, so we've made all these changes at Roxbury Farm, and it's like, okay, fantastic, wonderful story, anecdotal stuff. But the bottom line is that show me your documentation. Well, we were busy farming. So I can tell you we doubled the organic matter over, 13 years or whatever it took. And, it was 1.4 to begin with, so we brought up to 2.8, right? And it's still remarkable. But the thing, though, is that right now I have the opportunity not only to be able to teach that to the next generation, but to document it. So we have a partner organization that is actually, they are based at Hudson Valley in Harlemville. It's the Farmscape Ecology Program. And they're working here to do a lot of mapping and monitoring here at the Hub. We did a soil health test as a baseline documentation last year on the full acreage. They're looking at the full ecology of the whole farm. So what I am really interested in is to be able to now have the documentation in place that, say, 5 years or 10 years from now, we can say, see, here are the changes that took place after we converted from conventional sweet corn to these vegetables and small grains, beans and corn. And we can now see this is what the yield is, this is what the organic matter is, but in much greater detail. So this is a very exciting opportunity, not just for me, but for all of organic farming, that we have this gigantic lab where we can monitor all these changes that we organic farmers have claimed are better for the soil. And so having the resources available here to do that documentation is a huge change compared to working at Roxbury, where we were really in the trenches, and ultimately we had to make a living from every activity we did every day. And so this is a luxury.
That actually connects tangentially with something that I wanted to talk to you about, which is you're not involved on a daily basis with Roxbury Farm anymore. And yet Roxbury Farm continues on. Mm-hmm. That's not an easy transition to make. I mean, I can't imagine it was an easy transition for you to step away. And I also can't imagine that it was an easy transition for Roxbury Farm itself to make, to suddenly have you not be there.
Yeah, I understand that could be a perspective. Yeah, I think that I was definitely struggling for a number of years to say, like, I really worked myself out of a job at Roxbury Farm. The farm was kind of like, we're there. My body did not allow me to be on the harvest crew anymore. My knees don't allow me to kneel in the field for more than half an hour before I start, becoming stiff. And so I was doing a lot of the tractor work. I was really isolating myself from the crew. And really some of the people who were working for multiple years at the farm, in some ways, I was really in the way for some upward mobility there, because they would like to do the haymaking and that kind of stuff. So in many ways, it was a logical thing for me to say, listen, I've reached an age right now. I don't have to actively farm every day anymore. It's time for me in my career to pass on the information I have to the next generation. So this is really, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that, it's been a very slow transition for me from the daily operation, whereby Jody and Carrie we're really running the farm for longer than I have been gone there. And so Jody and I have been putting these procedures in place very, very carefully over the last 15, 16 years. And, you are familiar with our manuals that are online. And this is something that has really greatly helped to create an environment, what I like to refer to as like self-management, whereby people know their job, they know what is expected of them, and they're given a certain amount of autonomy to execute their job. There's no way that anyone can manage as diversified a farm as Roxbury by telling everybody every day what to do. People know what they do, and we have employees that have been with, some of them have been with us for 12, 13 years, and are not going anywhere. And that is really what allows a farm like that to continue. It's a highly diversified farm, and it cannot be carried by a single person. It has to be carried by a team. And I think that's, we successfully created that environment. And Jody and Carrie are excellent farmers who can make a lot of these executive decisions. They have that knowledge and skill level to do that. And there are a few times when they call me up and have a question, but it is rare. If anything, I'm a silent partner, and I look at the financials and we look over it. Things look good. So, And we do, of course, make a decision what equipment we purchase for the following year. And right now we're in the process of purchasing more land. And so this is ongoing. And I find it exciting that I'm able to step away from this and things are going on, because it should not be dependent on any individual how an operation is being run.
And so you said that you guys worked on creating these procedures over the years. How did you go about doing that? How did you actually structure things on the farm? The procedures are one piece, but I know because I've worked with farms who've done extensive procedures. It's not the only piece that makes it possible for other people to step into those positions of authority and responsibility.
No, you're absolutely right. I think you really you not really hire someone and put them in charge of a certain thing. You train them, and then it's really about slowly giving them more and more autonomy. When someone comes first on, and we move relatively slowly with people. If people come to the farm and they expect that they're going to be involved in the haymaking in year one or doing primary tillage in year one, they're going to be in for a huge disappointment. They start at the bottom of whatever work needs to be done. There will be planting, weeding, hoeing in the greenhouse. They'll be in the washing and packing. And then as they're getting a feel for the flow of the operation, they can step into more responsible positions. But that takes years. So this is not something that this has to be an operation that's run by people who have a long-term investment. And we are blessed with having had very, very talented people attracted to working at Roxbury Farm. So yes, there's a certain amount of being fortunate involved in this as well.
You just mentioned the importance of training. And again, you guys have put a huge amount of effort into developing resources that you've made available publicly. And we're going to put a link to that on the show notes page on the Farmer to Farmer podcast website. But tell me a little bit more about how you do your training when you get somebody new on the farm. Because again, obviously you're not just handing them a manual and you're not just reading the manual to them. What do you guys do to get people up to speed?
Well, I mean, we always start with an orientation week. And now I'm speaking for Roxbury Farm. It's different, of course, the training we do here at the Farm Hub. It's just much more intensive. And it's much more theoretical based here as well. There's a lot of knowledge training happening here at the Farm Hub that is not necessarily happening at Roxbury Farm. It's all based on the actual activities. So it's really about showing people that this is how something is being done. And I think that we'll be taking too much time to go into all the different procedures. But imagine that this is what. Well, first of all, it is really important that you communicate in many different ways how you expect the job is to be done. So we are very dependent on what we call cheat sheets, on task list. So people know if they're new to the farm, or even if they have been for a couple of years on the farm, they know through the weekly task list what we have decided, what needs to be accomplished in that particular week. That gives them a sense of like, okay, I'm grounded. I know that this week we're going to plant corn. This week we're going to, hoe the lettuce or whatever maybe we're going to make hay. And so they know the overview. So they feel somewhat grounded. It's a very important part of the training. And if possible, we'd like to involve them in the creation of the weekly task list. We also want it to be the eyes and ears of the farm and mention it in the morning meeting. We meet every meeting. We start off with a procedure whereby we check in with everyone to make sure that everybody is right there, ready to start the job. And then we communicate with them what the objectives are through the day. So we have a weekly task list, but in the morning meeting, we again articulate with them what the objectives for the morning are and for the afternoon are, and how we imagine the flow will happen. Then there is a clear, for example, with the CSA harvest, there's a harvest list. It will tell how many buckets need to be on the truck. So nobody has to think about this, or the buckets will be already on the truck or the baskets. And then there is a clear layout in the field whereby we creating a rotation whereby nobody has to start looking for things. So, for example, we know that particular greens are harvested before 8 o'clock in the morning. We'll group those together in one section, even though there might be 5 different plant families there. And because we are, having this rotation with green manures, we don't have to look that carefully. We can group different plant families together. It's more important that the crew is there in one section harvesting all the different crops. And when they're actually harvesting them, we have to sit next to them. And we will show them like, okay, this is how you hold your knife. This is how you grab the crop. This is how you place it. This is how many beets you want to have in a bunch. This is how you put your rubber band on. This is how you put the twist tie on. Whatever it might be, you guide people through that. And then we are developing expectations. We say like, so you harvested, so many cases of this product. Well, I did about, twice as many. Let's see how I can improve your procedures so you can keep up with my speed, because I'm really not any better than you. There's probably a different way to hold my knife. It might be a different way I put the bunch on. We always assume that there's nothing to do with the fact that people don't want to increase their speed. It's a matter of like looking at how they move their body, how they move their hands, and with the focus being on like, I remind them all the time, like you are looking for the minimal amount of movements. You really, if every movement you make too much, you're tiring yourself out. We can't afford to make a movement that is unnecessary. So we're focused on that. And that is really, that gets ingrained in everything we do. We really try to minimize movements. So you set things up so it is clear how the washing setup is, and you guide people through that. And in the beginning, there's going to be a lot of like, just watch us how we do this. You take good observations and let the crew that has done this for 10 years, let them just show you how we do this. And so a lot of learning happens by osmosis. That you don't have to really explain everything verbally. A lot of happened by example. And having long-term employees who are quite good at doing their job are the best teachers.
Who makes up your long-term labor force at Roxbury Farm?
Yeah, so we have, I would say 1/3 of the employees, maybe a little bit more, are full-time year-round employees. 1/3 are seasoned employees that live locally, and then 1/3 is probably people that come for 1 or 2 years. So there's a real balance there between, and I would say that the local employees that are seasonal, they work with us for 8 months of the year, they are extremely important. They, it's just that we don't carry them over the winter, or we bring them in over the winter when we maybe pack the winter vegetables, but they're really, we can't, at this point, Roxbury Farm cannot employ 10 full-time employees.
So what are you doing in the wintertime that helps you keep 1/3 of your staff on over the winter?
Yeah, so, they are working less. It's understood that many of them will work 55 hours or so in the summer months, and then they will work 20 or 25 hours in the winter months. So when we talk about full-time, there's a real balance. People take their vacations over the winter months. So I think this is the kind of area where everybody can breathe again. And we'll take that advantage, but we make sure they live on the farm. So, they don't have to worry about their ongoing living expenses. So this is one way in which we can, we make sure that they meet their annual needs in order to be able to live sustainably. So they don't have to look for a job over the winter. They know that they have money saved up in order to be able to get by on their 20 or 25 hours over the winter. But having housing provided is really important in that scenario, that they don't have to worry about, housing, about heat and light and everything else.
So Jean-Paul, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what it was like getting started in CSA farming back in. Now, again, you and I stumbled earlier because it's in my notes that you developed the vegetable garden at Hudson Valley Farm Prior to starting Roxbury Farm in 1990, I mean, this is in the dawn of the CSA era here in the United States. You tell me about getting started and how you got that whole ball rolling when there weren't any models to follow.
Yeah. One of these things. It was really that I was approached by someone in New York City, Jonathan Hilton. They had attended a lecture by the executive director of the Biodynamic Association, Rod Scholdice, about CSA. And Rod had seen what I'd done in Minnesota. He was aware of my work at Hudson Valley. And so these people were looking for a vegetable farmer. And I had just, I just started Roxbury Farm based on wholesaling vegetables. I work with 2 organic wholesalers, focusing mostly on lettuce and tomatoes and some greens. And so Jonathan, called me up and said, like, you're willing to come to the city and talk about this. So we had this meeting on West 13th Street in Manhattan. And I said, like, sure, let's have it a go, because the wholesale business at that point was very volatile. We were just in a takeover of a large organic wholesaler from the West Coast, was trying to gain monopoly on the East Coast. And there was some cutthroat pricing going on there that made me diversify my market portfolio actually quite a bit. I moved away from the traditional organic wholesale business to institutions, the Culinary Institute, Omega Institute, and others, which didn't really demand organic certification. And so it's like, well, this might fit in. And also what we fit in is then going to the green market in New York City. So we went to the green market and also met our members in New York City. And what happened was that a year later, and one of the things I told Jonathan says, traditionally nobody actually went to the city. And I actually questioned that. I said, it's really hard. This whole CSA model was based off a farm whereby Trauger imagined that the future churches, right, of a community would be the farms. So instead of people going to church, they would go to a farm. It was like this incredible, this vision that Trauger brought about what CSA farms could become. They could really be a community builder, like churches have been a community builder. Not that the CSA would be a religion, not and by any means of the word, but more like, when you have a community, this could be another place where people go to create community, just like they go to church to create community, aside from, their religion. So I think, and I said to Jonathan, like, well, that's not really, we're going to be in the city. It's going to be a very loose relationship. And I actually called Trauger up and I said, Trauger, can you actually start a CSA farm in the city? And there was a long pause. And he's like, well, he said, people in the city have to eat too, right? And that was it. So, all right, let's just try it. Let's do it. And then a year later, I got a call from Albany, from the Committee for Peace and Justice, who had heard what we were doing. And the concept that we were doing in New York City was very simple. We said, like, you support the farm, and then the vegetables are free. And that's really how we spread the idea of CSA. It was not like, come here, get your vegetables and this and that. It was really about, this is about supporting a farm in their operating budget. And then if they're successful, the vegetables are free. And the Committee for Peace and Justice really liked what they heard about that. And they contacted me and said, like, we would like to do this in the Capital District as well. And we had to get the blessing from the bishop. We met with the bishop, Bishop Hubbard, and he immediately got it. He said, like, this is a peace and justice initiative. This is about bringing equity to agriculture and to the farm workers in a very practical way. And he gave his blessing, and we immediately expanded that second year to 300 members. So it went very quickly because of the way in which we made our connection, first in Manhattan through the Center for Anthroposophy, and then in the north with the diocese And then we pretty much weaned off our wholesale business and continued serving the CSA and the institutions for the next 10 years until we became completely community supported once we made the move to Kinderhook. We moved the farm from Claverack, where we were for 10 years, to a new location for long-term land tenure then in 2000.
So with 1,000 members in your CSA and marketing at somewhat of a distance to at least a portion of those, how do you guys maintain the connection with your membership?
Well, we have always emphasized that we really need an active membership. We originally had core groups, and the core groups were really our ambassadors to the members. So the sites, we have 17 different sites. They are quite active. They form their own community around themselves. So right now, they are maybe less in community with the farm as they are also with each other. Although a significant number of these people come to work days or they come to a festival at the farm, and they are being kept up to date every week through a weekly newsletter. So they will hear what is happening on the farm. And now with Johannes, our son, being back at the farm, he takes a lot of pictures and sometimes videos, and he reports really a lot of that. So there's a more audiovisual ways in which people can have news about what is happening at the farm. But there's not like in a traditional sense, like with Trauger and Anthony and Lincoln, where you have a real community around the farm that sits around once a year and pledges their support to a pledge system. We are, in that sense, more traditional with a share price, and which differs from side to side. But you know, it is less of the original impulse as Trauger had imagined that.
I did want to make sure that if there was something more you wanted to say about the farmer training program, that we grab that.
Let me just say about the farmer training program that so we will be accepting applicants again. And we will open up again between July and August. People check our website. We're looking for people who are absolutely committed to be long-term in agriculture. This is a training for people who aspire to work on the mid-scale and to make agriculture their living. And so we had 60 applicants last year. We were very happy about the tremendous interest that people have shown. It's a very strong selection process. We take it very seriously. And we just want to invite people to follow us and apply, and follow us online on all the activities that are happening here at the Hub.
Awesome. With that, Jean-Paul, we're going to turn to our lightning round after we get a quick word from one more sponsor. This lightning round and the Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by Small Farm Central, providers of Member Assembler CSA management software. Member Assembler makes it easy for CSA members to sign up and for you to manage the process, all in a flexible, easy to customize format. And once you have your members signed up, Member Assembler gives you better ways to get your CSA information to your staff, including customizable pickup lists, box building tools, and calculated harvest lists. It makes it easy for CSA members to update their shares and request vacation holds, and provides a platform for segmented and scheduled email messaging. Plus, Member Assembler's auto rollover tool has been shown to increase retention by 6 to 7% all on its own, a feature that can be worth hundreds of dollars per member in lifetime value. Member Assembler helps you spend less time in the office and more time doing what you do best, farming. smallfarmcentral.com. Jean-Paul, what's your favorite tool on the farm?
Oh, my favorite tool on the farm? Well, probably the baler. I love baling hay. Probably not the one you expected to hear, huh?
No, because we of course we didn't talk about the hay. What about the baler? What does it for you about that tool?
Oh well, this is a particular baler. It's a Krone Fortima baler, and I really the last number of years that I was still at Roxbury, I really felt like I want to be able to get a good grass-fed beef product, and it's all in the forage. And so if it is all in the forage, yes, you can grow good forage, but then you also have to be able to preserve it. So this particular baler makes a very, very tight bale. We bale at about 40% moisture, and then we wrap it, and it becomes balage. and our grass clover mix. We bring our meat to the butcher, and it just has beautiful marbling. And I think we got the greatest compliment we could ever get, which is that the butcher himself wants to buy one animal a year from us. I mean, he sees a lot of animals, but he wants our animal for his own use. So to me, that's like, okay, we're doing something right. But, that baler has something to do with it. Of course, there's a whole thing behind it that you have to make sure that your nutrient budgeting is correct for your hay fields and pastures and everything else. But forage is such a pleasure, and I love making hay. It's just, it's just something it's my quality of life moment, making hay.
That's awesome. And now if I ask, what's your favorite crop to grow? Are you going to turn around and say hay as well?
Possibly, but I really enjoy growing. Now, I'm going to give you another answer here. Yes, hay, of course, but I really enjoy bell beans and I really enjoy crotalaria. So again, these are two green manure crops. This will be, and if you would ask me what vegetables do I like, I really like carrots. I think carrots is a great crop. It's been undervalued in the marketplace tremendously, but it's really nice to grow. And the other one is sweet potatoes. I like root crops in general. If I want to select any crop in my vegetables that I really enjoy a lot, is growing vegetables on ridges. Yeah.
And finally, Jean-Paul, if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, so we're talking way back in time here, what would it be?
If I would tell myself something, well, I've had I've been fortunate that I had really good mentors. And so my mentors told me everything that I really needed to hear back then. And I would say that one of my mentors was my teacher in economics. And I had mentors like in a diversity of places. So you have farmer mentors, and my teacher of economics was a mentor. And he said, he said, you're about to graduate from school right now. He said, just realize that farming is a great way to lose a lot of money. All right. He said, he said, what I want you to do now, he said, I want you to do what you really want to do, what you really believe in that you should be doing. And he said, become good at it and become the best. He said, because he said, ultimately, since farming is a good way to lose a lot of money, he said, you can't really make too many mistakes. And he said, and if you become really good at what you like doing most, he said, you're also going to find is that money actually flows to good ideas and good execution. He said, don't ever worry about the money. He said, because the money will find you. And I thought that was a really great piece of advice, and I followed that, and it actually works.
Thank you so much, Jean-Paul, for being on the Farmer to Farmer podcast today and letting me mark something off on my bucket list.
Well, I feel deeply honored.
All right. So wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 110 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast. And you can find the notes for this show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Courtens. That's Courtens. The transcript for this episode is brought to you by Earth Tools, offering the most complete selection of walk-behind farming equipment and high-quality garden tools in North America. And by Growing for Market, where you can get 20% off your subscription with the code PODCAST at checkout. You can get the show notes for every Farmer to Farmer podcast in your inbox by signing up for my email newsletter at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Also, if you like the show, please head on over to iTunes, leave us a review, or talk to us in the show notes, or tell your friends on Facebook. We're at Purple Pitchfork on Facebook. And hey, when you talk to our sponsors, please let them know how much you appreciate their support of a resource you value. You can support the show directly by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. I'm working to make the best farming podcast in the world, and you can help. And speaking of help, people who've helped include Dan Breezebois, who I'd like to thank for his support of the show. Finally, please let me know who you would like to hear from on the show through the suggestions form at farmertofarmerpodcast.com, and I'll do my best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there. Keep the tractor running.